There's an infinite number of monkeys out here who want to talk to us about this trip for Hamlet they work out.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Create and Resonate. And I'm joined by author and social media guru and businessman, Simon Young. Simon, tell us
Hi,
about
Lee.
you.
Yes, I haven't been a social media guru for quite a while, but I was among those of us who got in quite early. First came across you in, 2005, 2006 on the
Yeah, that'd be
FIR podcast. Yeah, yeah. These days I am starting a startup called One Ancestor, and also working with my wife in a company called PEP, which works with Pacific populations here in New Zealand. And I do some of that social media stuff, building websites and a bit of training and a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
That's how it goes these days. We've got to be portfolio.
That's it.
So let's get into the meat, because I appreciate that you've got to go off and do other things. The book
Yes.
that we're going to be talking about today. And look, yes, that's it.
Let me just unblur myself.
Now, that's not, there we go.
Yes.
Reboot Yourself. Exactly. Great book. Loved it.
Thank you.
I sort of noticed, and I'm looking at my notes at the moment. I took some notes.
Yes.
It's kind of like it's a hero's journey mixed with a 12-step program.
100%.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, I've been a curator of ideas that are really well known and well traveled. That the innovation that I brought was just bring the two together, because I love storytelling, and so I've long found the hero's journey quite an interesting structure, because it has a sort of a beginning, middle, and an end, or it's a cycle rather. The 12 step, as long ago as maybe more than 20 years ago, I found in a secondhand bookshop a book called 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, which actually it's sort of the admin manual of 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was really struck by how psychologically safe it was, in that it's a leaderless structure. Everyone has a responsibility to, take ownership and take leadership, but it's not like one leader saying, here's the vision, we're going in this direction. And so it struck me as quite a stable structure, and also very honest. To be a member, you've got to admit that you've got a problem, which is not like a lot of organizations we have in the world these days. When I just dug a little bit deeper into that 12-step side of things, I found that the origins didn't come from addictions. It came from just people who were already doing good things wanting to be better. And so it's like, oh, that's kind of the secret sauce of the book, is that you don't have to have an addiction to have the benefit of some of these steps. Yeah.
That's, if I could just interrupt there, that's a really interesting take on it, because I mean, you're saying this, you came across this in a bookshop, what, 20 years ago or something?
Years ago, something like that. Yeah.
That attitude of the book, the 12 steps, is not it's kind of leaderless in a way, that it's open to everyone contributing.
Yeah.
That's just way ahead of its time.
Very much so. I mean, the book was published in the 50s, I think. And so, yeah, it's only now that we're starting to see things like holacracy, or even in blockchain, you've got your DAOs, that kind of idea, but it's still kind of radical. And yet, the 12 steppers were doing it way back in the 30s or the 50s. Yeah.
So what inspired you then? I mean, I love the idea of taking two things that are very solid, very respected, and melding them together. That's brilliant. Love that.
Thank you.
What inspired you to go down this path and write this particular book in the first place?
I think I've always been somebody who's known I'm a little bit broken, and always looked at other people and go, you know what, these people are also a bit broken as well. But it's kind of, in polite society, we don't kind of admit that. And so I liked the company of people who acknowledged that, okay, I've got a problem. And so in the year that I wrote it, 2022, I'd actually signed up to a course about self-publishing on Amazon, which you've been doing a heck of a lot of. You've been really prolific. And so I went through the modules, and then promptly, as I always do, did my own thing instead. So the modules were saying, get a simple idea that's really a niche, very much niche down into something really specific, and get a ghostwriter to write it for you. Don't bog yourself down with writing it. And so I thought, oh, well, I'm a writer. Always been a writer my whole career, so I'll write it. That's okay. But my idea back then of a niche was a massive area like self-help. And so with perfect
Hardly
hindsight,
anyone's into self-help, are
hardly
they?
anyone's doing that. Only like multi-million dollar selling James
Yeah,
Clear with his Atomic Habits and
yeah,
Tony Robbins, and oh, I must
yeah,
have been crazy. Must have been
yeah.
crazy. But yeah, and also the course was saying, it has to be something you can be interested in. And so typical me, I go, well, let me just throw my whole heart into this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, not very detached at all. So
No, no,
yeah,
no, no,
yeah,
no, no.
absolutely.
I recently, oh, excuse me, my dog, hang on. Kaz, you put yourself into that position.
She's stuck.
Right. Okay.
Dude,
Sorry about that.
that's all
So,
right.
so yes, I mean, I found out recently that I'm probably or DHD, which
Yes,
means that and the reason I've written so many books is because I just do a bit of research because I've got this idea
yes.
and spend like a week not sleeping, just bashing
Wow,
it, and micro focusing, and then collapsing for a week.
that's
So
amazing.
yeah, I understand totally how you can
Yes,
sort of like focus on something
yeah,
and it becomes your sort of kind of be all and end all,
totally.
and but you knock out something really quite quickly that's just different from everyone else.
Absolutely. There was also the mixed blessing of at the time there was no paid work on, so I had free time. Basically, I was able to be a full-time writer for about a month. So that was great.
So how long did it take you to write the book then? Was it only a month or?
It would have been about a month. It felt like a long time after that I was faffing around, the faffing around stage. So I hired a proofreader and editor, had went through that stage, went through the changes, and yeah, had some what they call beta readers. So that's people
Yep.
who read it before you've published it to give their feedback.
Mm.
That was really interesting. I don't think I changed too much from that. Um, yeah, but it was really good to know what really resonated with people and trying to cast my mind back. I don't know what it was now, but something resonated with them.
Well, I resonated. What was
Yeah.
it? What was their
Oh, you were
name?
one of them. That's right.
I resonated with who was it? There was a guy
Yeah.
that hang on a second. Jerry.
Jerry. Oh,
Jerry's
yes.
addiction recovery. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you connected with Jerry and tell our audience as well.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, so there's three kind of stories told throughout the 12 chapters as that person goes through, because sometimes the way to understand a concept is to see somebody else go through it. And
Mm,
so Jerry's got an addiction, and it's not a substance addiction, which is probably better known and maybe even a bit more socially acceptable. Jerry's got a sex addiction. And so his process is going through actually well, the first step is acknowledging that you're kind of helpless in the face of this addiction. It's not a matter of try harder. It's a matter of
mm,
actually start from a point of like, I do not have the wherewithal to actually stop what I'm doing. Yeah, and then he works his way through the steps. And so that came about from a lot of conversations that I had with people.
mm.
Yeah, to basically
I
understand.
bet because yeah, I mean, alcohol or drugs that's accepted because everyone has heard of those things. But sex
That's right.
addiction, a
Yeah,
lot of people don't believe that sex addiction exists,
that's
uh,
right. Even in the
and so
medical
it's just a
community, yeah.
guy just being a guy.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just yeah, it's a tough one to get people's heads across. I mean,
that's
I've had
right.
the same thing with neurodiversity. All
Right.
my friends that I've known since school days, they don't
Yes.
believe that neurodiversity exists because they've
Wow.
they've never come across it before. It was
Yes.
20
Yes.
years ago, just that's for children, it's not for adults.
Yeah.
Whereas of course now the science is catching up and
Yeah.
and it's saying, yeah, well, actually this thing does exist and it's bigger than we ever
Definitely.
thought it might be. It's a huge thing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I've got this weird counterintuitive thing with disabilities and with addictions to some extent. Like if somebody knows that they've got a condition or an addiction and they've had to fight through it, my respect for them instantly is more than if I just thought that they were just doing
Lazy
absolutely
or
fine.
something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a reflex for me now that it's
Mm.
like somebody was like, I've got PTSD, and I'm like, wow, awesome. I'm like, sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to say it like that, but
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, these friends of mine, they said the same thing. They said, because I can't cook and I've
right,
been to cooking classes and everything, just
yeah.
can't cook. I burn water.
Oh,
And they said, oh, you're just being lazy. Everyone can cook. You're
oh
just being
boy,
lazy. And,
yeah,
this was only a few months ago.
yeah.
And I said, no, my brain's not wired this way. Ah, bollocks. So,
Wow.
you just, it's something new for a lot of, especially boomers. I think
Yes,
they've grown up in an era where there was none of this. Science didn't know it.
yes, yeah. That's right.
And now yeah. So what about then with Jerry? What was the outcome with Jerry? Let everyone
Yeah.
know.
So Jerry goes through the hardest time in his life where he has to actually admit to his wife what's going on, which is really difficult. And then thankfully for him, things work out okay, and he ends up not only having a good relationship with her, but a better relationship with himself.
Mm.
Because with addiction, there is a lot of shame and a lot of self-hatred and a lot of identifying so closely with the addiction that it becomes like I'm just an irredeemable person.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, and I think in looking at what kind of addictions there are socially unacceptable ones and acceptable ones. Like there's a Workaholics Anonymous as well. But there
Ah.
is still that whenever you're doing something impulsively or compulsively that you don't want to be doing, there is that sense of like, well, I just hate this situation and I also hate the person who's doing it, which happens to be me.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I was reading something the other day that there's now a thought process within the literature that pornography is not men just being men, but it's
right.
actually part of ADHD in that
Interesting.
your brain's just wired. It's part of a reaction against something. I can't.
Yeah,
I didn't really get into it, but it was a reaction. It's not just a bloke enjoying himself all the
right.
time or
Yeah,
going off to see someone all the time. It's
yeah.
actually something to do with the wiring. But look,
Interesting.
we're going away from the book as
Yeah.
such. The writing process.
Oh,
How did
yes.
you go about writing the first draft? Was it just in Word? Did you just bash things out, or did you have
Pretty
it? Did you
much.
plot
I
before?
hmm. Let me cast myself back. I had I had two phases. The first half was a lot easier to write. So I outlined it first. I knew that I was going to have 12 chapters, one for each step, which was really handy to have a model to borrow. And I guess that's where fiction writers I really empathize because it's like, well, you start and you don't even know where it's going to end up.
No.
For this, I sort of knew where I was going to end up. So that was helpful, especially when the first five chapters were so easy to write. It was just a flow. And the when I sort of got to the middle, I started running out of steam. So this was the first time
Yeah.
I'd written a whole book. And to
Yeah.
me, I sort of understood that, okay, 50,000 words is like the standard. Although I come from a copywriting background, and so I'm always about cutting it down. I used to write for radio where we had to write 30-second spots, 75 words. And so I got really good at like chopping out unnecessary words. And here was this big challenge, 50,000 words. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And so I realized that that's partly why the scope is so broad, because I didn't believe at the time that you could niche so deeply and still do 50,000 words. So that was an interesting challenge. And I think with a couple more years under my belt now, I think, okay, now I get it. And so I'm actually thinking of doing a sequel where it's specifically for men or specifically for women. Probably co-write that one with an actual woman. Uh, but that's what I saw when I researched, like, what are people looking for in terms of self-help books? They're looking for specific for that specific demographic. But anyway, back to writing. Yeah, reached that halfway point, had to really kind of like motivate myself to keep going. This is just before generative AI, like months before ChatGPT was was first out, like so close. But so I didn't have I call ChatGPT my little buddy. I didn't have my little buddy to ask questions or tighten things up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and also when I some of it I would do in the study that we had at home at the time. Other times I would actually get myself up and go to a cafe because I just love the white noise of people talking.
Yeah.
And especially when I'm writing about things that are meaningful to human beings, I kind of want to be able to cite some and go, what do they look like again?
Well, I kind of do the same with some of my stuff in that I'll
Right.
take myself off to a cafe because I
Yes.
like the ambience, exactly the same as you,
Yeah.
but I'll stick noise headphones on.
Yeah,
So
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so it dulls it down a bit enough that
Yes.
my neuro brain can cope with it, but
Absolutely.
I still
Yes.
like being in that environment because
Yes.
there's a buzz about it somehow. Yeah.
And there's, I don't know if anyone else does this, it's a bit pretentious, but I get into this. Actually, I do have the headphones on sometimes, and I have like movie theme tunes or something. And probably the look on my face is pretentious guy being pretentious. But for me, I'm feeling like this is very serious stuff that I'm doing. And I kind of know and kind of laugh at myself, but I'm like, at the time, it gets the job done.
Yeah, 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 and that's what you want. At the end of the day, it's great being in this cafe with all this ambience, but you've got a book to write. And
Totally. Yeah.
if you're there being distracted by this, 3-year-old running around
Yeah.
screaming, then yeah, the book doesn't get written. But it's interesting with the writing of the book that
Yeah.
if you talk to a lot of novelists, for
Yeah.
example, the middle of the book is where everything stops and you
Yes.
run out
Yes.
of ideas and you go,
Absolutely.
what the bloody hell am I going to say next? And
Absolutely.
so I feel for you with that middle of that book.
I think
How, it's,
even
sorry,
sorry.
so how did you go about the editing and the proofing? Because
Mm,
did you use like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, or did you just
no,
rely on those
I
those
just
people that you contacted?
I'm a pretty arrogant writer, so I was like, I did a spell check, and I'm like, yeah, pretty good. Although, just like picking this up for the first time in a couple of years, I spotted a typo. Like, oh my gosh, wow!
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was a proper name, and I'd spelt it was Brendan, and it's a complete unforced error, Brendan, and then
yeah.
Brendan. A few paragraphs later, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did
It's
a
it's
spell
there's a
check.
law. There's a law about that, a rule that I read on the internet once as
Yeah,
like someone's rule, someone's law. Typos are n plus one, and it's that plus one is after you've put it in and it's
after
in
actually
print.
printed, yeah.
Then you find the plus
That
one.
is so
Yeah,
true. That is so
guaranteed.
true.
Yeah.
Hopefully just one and not plus 11. Oh, yeah. But yeah, so I just did, I used to use Word, spell check and everything like that.
Mm.
I might have used the enhanced one that says like that this paragraph could be shorter, and then sometimes I'm yeah, bugger off. And then yeah, it sent it off to the human proofreader and then the human editor, whose jobs kind of overlapped quite a bit. Like the proofreader was actually a really good editor, and so yeah.
You
Um,
got value for money out of them then.
I really did, yeah, I really
Yeah.
did. And it's something about when you spend money on something, it's like, oh, this is for real now. It's not
Yeah.
just, especially in the age of blogging or that sort of thing, it's really easy to create content. But when you've passed it through a filter, a human filter, it's like, oh, this is, oh. um,
Yeah.
Cover design, same thing. Went on Upwork or Fiverr and got a cover designer. Um,
Mm.
Found it. I also needed to get an illustrator to do some of the concepts because things like a person carrying a horse, even now, I can't get AI to do that. Like, I think because there's nothing for it to reference, it gives me a person somehow connected with a horse, but not like the ridiculousness of the whole idea of a person
Mm.
struggling under the weight of the horse looking quite perturbed, like what's going on?
Yeah, that no AI will pop at that. No, no,
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
right. Yeah. What else was I gonna? I've got. Oh, yeah. Questions for you. Now, some self-help uh, readers
Mm,
criticize the whole self-help genre
Yes.
for rehashing old stuff. So,
Oh,
how
okay.
in your book, what would you say was the percentage between rehash,
Yeah.
um, like Tony Robbins does,
Yes.
or brand new stuff?
Interesting. Well, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, so I'm not an academic. I had no research of my own. I just had these anecdotes, and I did get feedback that more anecdotes would have been helpful, more case studies, more specificity. So if it was angled at somebody starting their own business, that sort of thing, that would have been helpful. So that was helpful feedback. But probably as it is a reconstitution, but I think a really good one. Based on the feedback that I got, and I think that was down to the tone. Kind of my audience was people who find Anthony Robbins a bit sus.
Mm, mm,
There's a certain level of hype in the self-help space,
mm.
and this is for somebody who's been there, done that. It didn't kind of work for them, but they do want to have a sense of mastery. Because I think the other thing with self-help is that often there is this, even though Anthony Robbins has a movie called I'm Not Your Guru, there is that sort of guru effect where kind of like, I am the master, this is the only way to go, come along my unique path. Um,
I know everything, and you follow me. You be the
yeah,
group.
yeah, that's right, which is straight path to doom kind of thing. My approach was much more like we are fellow travelers.
Mm,
I've noticed some patterns and they might help you. And I think I say straight out in the book, this is a menu, not a recipe. So like some of these things will be useful for you, some won't be. Just ditch the ones that won't be useful.
mm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, no, brilliantly put.
I
Um,
did have, sorry,
Go on, go on, go on.
I did have one review from it was the weirdest backhanded compliment ever. It was a guy who wanted to give me a high review, but he was also a fan of Jordan Peterson, who is actually a psychiatrist. I
Yeah.
disagree with Peterson on many things, but I give him his credit that he is actually qualified. And so he'd done a book which was like really systematic and all that kind of stuff. So interesting thing to be compared with. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that would be a compliment to be put even in the same
Even in the same
league.
sentence. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Definitely.
So
Yeah.
no, no, I've never had anyone do that with mine. So kudos to you, sir.
Cheers.
Now, for those who are listening, um, what is you've got 70 words. I'm giving you a challenge, 70
Yeah.
words to sum up what Reboot is, what your
Wow.
book is about.
Yeah. Okay. It's a, well, that's how many words already?
5.
It's a menu, not a recipe
Yeah.
of steps that you can take to get yourself out of anything that you find yourself stuck in and into the next thing. Because sometimes self-help books just focus on one or the other. And often the worst thing we can try to do is start the new thing before stopping the old thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's bloody brilliant. Yeah, that's what I read all those years ago.
Yeah.
It was actually it came at a time where you gave me the book to read. It came at a time when it just how sometimes you get something and
Yeah.
it's exactly what you need at that moment.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
and yeah, it just like it solved one of the problems that I had. And now
Yeah.
I can't remember what that problem was because this is
That's cool.
1700 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just remember going, he's right. Wow.
Wow.
And so I went away and fixed that problem. So that's down to
Yeah.
you.
Oh,
You're the
wow. Amazing. That is
I've
incredible.
got another question. Okay.
Yes.
The hero's journey, that's
Yeah.
rooted in that's a Western concept.
Yes.
How does the reboot, how does that approach and relate to and with indigenous and or Asian cultures?
Really interesting. So actually, I think just after I'd published it, when ChatGPT came around, I said like, give me some non-Western stories or legends that kind of correspond to these steps, and it gave me heaps. I found out that ChatGPT eventually just scraps conversations from that long ago, so I'll have to ask the question all over again. But
Mm.
it was amazing. There were things from the Bhagavad Gita, I think it is the
Yeah,
Hindu
Bhagavad Gita.
scriptures.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep. There were things from Maori legends. There were things from Chinese. The Journey to the West. Journey to the West is a great one. The famous Monkey King. It's a kind of a pilgrimage, but the main character is eventually transformed from being quite a very headstrong character into quite a pure, with that Buddhist ideal of kind of letting go of all attachments. It kind of, from what little I know of Buddhism, it fits in quite well. But yeah, I sort of acknowledge that I'm a Western guy in a Western world. I'm married to a Samoan, and so I have some sort of access into the Samoan culture, but not much of the stories. And so that's another opportunity for a sequel. Is like, yeah,
Mm.
let's find some. But in terms of structure, it was really interesting that, and this was, I guess, with Joseph Campbell's thing with the hero's journey, was it was pretty universal. It was kind of a recurring theme across all cultures. Not just Greco-Roman, but yeah, Indian cultures, Chinese cultures, that sort of thing. That there was this, and it's cyclical as well. So the hero does come back to where he started with some sort of renewed life. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some sort of significant change. There's been the battles
Mm.
through, the
Mm.
trials and tribulations, the absolute worst they could possibly feel, and
Yes,
the struggle to get out of that big hole. And they
absolutely.
end up back at the circle. They end up
Mm.
back at the where they started,
Yeah.
and they're better for having
Yeah,
been through the journey, even though it's been horrific at the time.
that's right. The place is the same, but they're a different person.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So did it take you on a journey? I mean, you wrote it, so
Yeah, it did.
yeah.
So it reflected a lot of things that I'd gone through, and that was literally a pivotal year. I got sick in the early part of that year, and a little infection like what was it, cellulitis, put me in hospital for basically a month. Yeah, so which the first time I'd ever been in hospital as a patient. I've been a visitor plenty of times, but and so flat on your back, looking at the ceiling and just realizing, I don't know, thinking a lot of things about life. My mother had also passed away just a few months earlier, and one of the realizations I had, so I was listening to, when you're in a hospital ward, you just eavesdrop by default. And there was a guy opposite me, and he was getting early stage dementia. So my mum had dementia as well. And so he was talking with his daughter and his wife about the rest home that he was going to. And I was like, oh, that's the rest home that mum was at. And he was obviously really worried about it. And I thought, I want to be a caring and good person. Maybe I should go and tell him, hey, it's going to be all right. And then this voice in my head said, my mum went there and it was all right. But then the voice in my head said, yeah, but now she's dead. And then it was like, mean voice. What an
Yeah.
ugly voice in my head. But then it was
Yeah.
like,
Don't go
grief.
there because people die.
Exactly, exactly. And then I experienced grief for the first time. Like I had a cry, but it was like when you're in hospital, there's nothing else to do except feel your feels. And
Mm.
so it was, the way I put it is like uh, a mental picture of a ceiling that's actually got water on it, and that it's sagging and sagging and sagging, and then it finally bursts. That's what the feeling was like. And I realized that prior to that, I'd prided myself on actually being logical. I thought it was, about my feelings, and I was actually pole vaulting over them. Like I was
Mm.
like, I was mentally, like intellectually smart enough to see, oh, there'll be some grief coming up. Right, I'll run up and just take a leap right over it. And because I've intellectualized it, oh, I know that there will be grief because this, that, reasons, reasons, reasons. Cool, I've experienced grief and I hadn't. I had just sort of acknowledged that there was a possibility of happening and then leaped right over it and tried to carry on. Without realizing that, there were also, so mum's passing also helped me come face to face with my father's passing. He died when I was 3 years old. And so there was like 40 years separating these two very important deaths, and massive, massive amount of closure happening, and sort of, yeah, just a lot of, after that process, I felt, um, tired, but also complete, if that makes any sense.
Yes, yes, it
Yeah,
does.
yeah,
Most
yeah.
definitely. I'm wondering how traumatic that would have been. I've got my psychologist hat on now, but I
Yes.
wonder how traumatic that would have been um, as a 3-year-old,
Oh, yeah.
because you. I mean, I had something happen to me when I was between 7 and 8 years of age or something, living in England. Buried it so deep, never even knew, and it was only last week that it popped up because of something else.
Wow.
And it
Wow.
was like, wow, where did that come
Yeah,
from? And it
yeah,
was
yeah.
really traumatic, but I buried it so deep. So I'm
Mm.
wondering whether that was the same with you, that you'd buried it because it was so painful. And then through the process of writing,
Yeah.
it suddenly came out. I don't know.
No, it was more, I was conscious of it all the time, but I wasn't really aware of how I was dealing with feelings.
Yeah.
Basically, denial by explanation. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
won't have
that's
to go
that's
through
the way
that
we men
feeling.
do it, isn't it? We
Yeah,
do. I mean, we do the
totally.
manly thing. We man
Yeah,
up and we
absolutely.
don't talk about our feelings. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
especially I had minimized my trauma because I tend to be around people who have had it worse than me, and so my wife and I did this thing, which later we found was actually really good clinical practice, where but she sort of come across it intuitively, where you kind of take slices of your life at a decade period. So I think she was 44 at the time, and she goes, at 4 years old, this happened. At 14 years old, this happened, and this is what happened in those decades in between. And so she'd done hers, which was she's been through some stuff, right? And then I did mine. I was like, oh, it was pretty okay. Then my dad died, and it's just like, wait, stop. She already
Just
knew that.
back up there. Yeah,
Just back the truck up and like, that's
yeah.
not a normal thing to happen to a young boy. And then, yeah, growing up the youngest, kind of essentially being raised by my older sister. She's like quite a bit older than me, so two mums, and them having their dramas and me like being young and then looking up and going, "Gosh, I sort of envy adult drama." I was like, "Oh, that's not a good thing to envy. That's not a thing to want." Now
Yeah.
I'm 50 this year, and I'm like, man, kid life is awesome.
It's just like, as a teenager, I always wanted to shave, like my dad.
Yeah.
And eventually I did start shaving, and it was kind of like, why on earth did I do that? Because,
Now you're
every
stuck with that
bloody
for life.
day from then on, I had to shave. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
I
true.
want to come back to the book because I am conscious that you've got to bugger off.
All right.
Um, Here we go. I said to you before, I was going to ask you an unexpected question,
Oh,
and I've
yes.
written down an unexpected question.
Oh.
What are the winning numbers for next Saturday's task? No, 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 it's not that. You share vulnerable stories, for example, Jerry's infidelity. Were there anecdotes or personal struggles you chose not to include, and why?
Yes. Trying to think what they were. Partly I originally wanted to have, I think, five different people, and they were kind of amalgams of people that I'd known or talked to. I ended up with three because it just kind of felt right. And I found that the body of the book was more than I thought it would be. I thought it would be mostly story and then a little bit of guidance, and it ended up being more guidance than story. So I can't actually remember what the stories were that I didn't leave in, but I thought it'd be good to have a good range. So like Jerry, his issue is himself. His enemy is number one, and then I forget her name. The female character that I had in there, her problem was an addiction to people pleasing. So
Mm,
not even known or seen as an addiction, but just as harmful. And then I think it's Stephen, maybe, was somebody who was he put himself in circumstances that he didn't have to be in, with a dysfunctional business relationship, and it just, yeah, didn't quite work out. And he had to figure his way out of that.
mm,
Yeah, so three stuck people, but very different kinds of stuckness.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that as you probably are too, that there's a second edition.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. And it may be specifically for men or for women, or maybe specifically with some end goal in mind, like starting a business, especially because, I mean, even back then, it was just after COVID lockdowns had finished, and a lot of people were trying to reinvent themselves,
Mm.
often through necessity. So that may
Yeah.
well be an angle for next one. Even now, I don't know how Australia is doing, but New Zealand, we're having a really bad recession, and our government has decided to help by firing a lot of public servants, like a lot, hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, gosh.
Yeah, we got the same problem, cost of living, and the coalition who aren't in power, but the
Yeah.
coalition saying, "Oh yeah, we've got to drop, 36,000 public servants," and it turns out that when they were in power, they increased the public service by 54,000. So that
Oh,
36, they're only getting rid of the people they introduced in the
they
first
brought
place.
in. Oh my
But
goodness.
it's good politics, it's
Of
just.
course. Oh,
Okay,
wow.
one last question, and then I'll let you have a word. Um, Sustainability. The turn-up phrase focuses on habit maintenance,
Yes.
but burnout. I'm guessing since you've written that, burnout has become an even bigger and bigger issue.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
how do you prevent the rebooted identity from becoming another source of pressure? For example, toxic
Yes.
positivity, because I hate
Yes.
that
Yes.
positive psychology movement with a passion.
Yes, I've
And
seen
so,
your
how do you
posts.
get rid of that toxic positivity?
Yeah, yeah. So really interesting. So at the moment, I'm starting a startup. So I'm part of a business accelerator at the moment, which is it's designed to get things done in a faster time frame. There is a little bit of that peer pressure. I call it positive peer pressure, but sometimes, honestly, it is setting a target and then kind of having some kind of punishment if you don't make the target. And I've realized that there's something now very intrinsic to me that just goes, bugger that. I'm not interested in that at all. And so I kind of just ignore it and but seek the what I and I guess I'm a cat rather than a dog. If a dog is motivated by punishment, which I don't think they are, right? But cats are motivated by pleasure. They will seek the sunshine or the warmth or whatever. They'll do what they want to do. And I'm very cat-like in nature, and so and that used to be harmful for me because I wouldn't be self-caring, but I'd be self-indulging, and now I'm sort of realizing that okay, I've I don't know, somehow I've integrated the idea of self-care into who I am, and so things like exercise, I'm not like, I've got to go to the gym and I've got to work really hard and I'm going to come home sore, which is how I used to do gymming. It's like, cool, I'm so blessed. I get to go to the gym. I can afford a gym membership. I get to use the equipment, and I get to regulate what I do. So I had a trainer set a program for me, and it's like, on this machine, 3 reps of 10 and then stop. And the and stop is like what I didn't used to have. It was like I've got to go harder. And I would have this cycle of burnout and then revival and then burnout again, and it's just a very horrible thing. And I kind of I think I think I wouldn't be so self-caring if I hadn't experienced burnout, and so I can sort of smell the stench of smoke when I get close to that kind of behavior. And so yeah, my wife and I had some cool experiences, often with travel and going places. And previously, I'd always tried to do a working trip and try to squeeze as much into a trip as possible and try and do it on the cheap or get paid for things, all that stuff. And the last 2 trips we did were just very single purpose. Uh, One of them was actually quite a biggie. It was getting gastric sleeve surgery. So we went halfway across the world to Turkey, and then our hospital was in the seaside resort, and I just remember in a little bit of discomfort after the operation, but just looking out the window at the beach and the sunlight going, oh, I just done a really big and good thing for myself, and just feeling my body saying, thank you, well done. And I don't know, I don't think there's enough of that in the world, knowing that you're okay and you do want good things, and if you can filter through the bad things that we impulsively want to the real good things, then just reward that. Don't be trying
Mm,
to punish yourself for non-compliance, but try and savor and appreciate how good compliance is not the right word, but how good it is to do the right thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's an intrinsic payoff, isn't there? It's not necessarily, a dollar in the pocket, but it's just kind of you feel good about what you've done. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's
And
right.
and that's kind of like recharging the internal batteries that
Yes.
you suddenly can go back out and the world might be falling to shit, but
Yeah.
you can go out there with a smile on your face and go, I'm really glad that I'm here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, now I'll ask you if you would to tell us where we can get a copy of Reboot because I think people would want to get hold of a copy of this.
Yes, absolutely. So Reboot Yourself is Reboot Yourself, turn off negative habits, turn on your motivation and confidence, and turn up to the life you always wanted is the full title. So you can go to rebootyourselfbook.com. That's got all the information about it, and it's got links through to the hardcover, the paperback, and the Amazon Kindle ebook.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to touch back on something you mentioned quite a little while ago, and that you found um, writing it difficult when you had to consider how many words the normal book is.
Yes.
Well, most of these books are written by Americans and they
Yeah.
have a contract for so many words. So that's why
Right.
when you read an American book, it's kind of like, you said the same thing in bloody chapter 7. Why in
Yes.
chapter 10 are you just like, so they don't, unlike you, they don't pare down the words.
Yeah.
And so you get this horrendous, word
Absolutely.
verbiage.
Absolutely. As a journalist, I used to get paid per word, and it's the most terrible incentive ever.
Ah,
That
oh,
my best article was when I had a 2,000 word article, and I transcribed all the interviews, and I had 6,000 words to cut down. It was hard work, but the feedback was so good. People really enjoyed how I was like pim, 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 really effective and exciting to read.
well, but yeah, absolutely. And we work in cultures which say, just get to the point,
Yes.
say it, and then don't bloody keep saying it. And that
Yes. Yeah.
seems to be the American model is, I've got 50 or 60,000 words to fill in, so I'll just say the same thing in a different way. It's horrible.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Simon, thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate it. And
Such a pleasure, Lee.
yeah, it's thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say as a last, epilogue or something?
Oh, well, just to say thank you very much for the opportunity. It's I've watched your posts on Facebook and your authoring career with admiration and I learned a few things about you, like that you're an actual psychologist. Like that was very interesting, and so that makes your endorsement of Reboot Yourself even all the more valuable. So thank you for that. And yeah,
Well, you're welcome because when I read it, it didn't strike me as someone who's just picked up a crayon
uh,
and written. It's well written, it's
yeah, yeah,
intelligent,
yeah.
and so that's one of the reasons why it appealed to me.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess in terms of an epilogue, so this podcast is about creating things, I guess. Yeah. So journaling has been such a lifeline for me, even during some of the most dysfunctional times of my life. Keeping a journal has been really helpful. I once during a particularly dysfunctional period, every entry was a complaint of some sort. I was like, oh gosh, I sound pretty emo here, and so I decided to have a habit that when I started to journal, I would just go thankful colon and then bullet points of whatever I could think of, and even if it was really dumb things like oxygen. It's great, thanks. You know,
Mm. Yeah.
roof over my head. Yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. It's sort of a list that you build up. But
Well, that's it because I did for a long time journaling as well, and yeah,
yeah,
I agree. It's a wonderful practice.
yeah,
And if you go to some of the the online gurus for stress, really,
yeah,
stress stuff, they all say journalism and
yes,
journals,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think it's become a thing. Yeah.
And even I mean, ChatGPT's kind of taken this place a little bit, but um, it's interesting when you're trying to figure something out or bring your thoughts together. Journaling is a little bit like I want to have a talk with somebody who's really smart about subject XYZ. I thought, what if I was that person, and then have that conversation with myself? It's kind of
Mm,
giving yourself permission, because we do pick up so much from every experience that we have and every conversation that we have, and the
absolutely.
information's there. It just kind of needs something to unearth it. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's helpful to somebody.
Excellent. Simon, again, thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome. That's such a pleasure. Thank you, Lee.